edition of Bureaucrats India webinar on disability, governance, milestones, challenges, and way forward. I am Naina Jha. Bureaucrats India webinar series is India's most popular, objective, and unbiased dialogue dedicated to celebrate the stories of good governance, our bureaucracy, public sector undertakings, and corporate sector. BureaucratsIndia.in is a leading online portal. It has redefined the idea of journalism in a very short span of time. Born in September 2020, BureaucratsIndia.in has become a popular platform for all those who cherish these stories of positivity, inclusivity, resilience, and excellence. Our four-pillared commitment to partner with India's odyssey towards self-reliance. Our knowledge partner for this special webinar today is National Center for Promotion of Employment for Disabled People. NCPEDP is a cross-disability not-for-profit organization working with a range of stakeholders to advocate for the rights of persons with disability, along with encouraging their employment, increasing public awareness, creating and disseminating knowledge, information, and opportunities, and working towards easy and convenient access to all public places, products, services, and technologies. Our communications partner is Grey Matters Communications, one of India's leading advocacy and PR firms. We are honored to have an esteemed panel with us today. Our guests today include Shri Arman Ali, Executive Director, National Center for Promotion of Employment for Disabled People; Shri Tushar Sumera, IAS and Deputy Collector Bharuch, Gujarat; Shri Ashish Sinha, Secretary General, Broadcasting Content Complaints Council; and Dr. Navneet Anand, Editor-in-Chief, Bureaucrats India. I welcome you all to this special edition of Bureaucrats India webinar. I request Dr. Anand to please carry forward the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Naina, and welcome and good evening. Jai Hind. स्वतंत्रता दिवस की पूर्व संध्या पे आप सबों का स्वागत है, and there couldn't have been a better day to discuss on a topic which is extremely critical, that is disability. What have been the milestones, the achievements, challenges, and the way ahead. And we have with us, as Naina said, a distinguished set of panelists who represent the best minds in the country. We also have two more panelists, two young IPS officers, Santosh Kumar Singh, who is an SP, Superintendent of Police of Korba, and Sanjay Sen, he is DCP in Northeast Delhi. And they both, because of the Independence Day preparations, they are caught up, but they have promised to join at a later point in time. And I thank you all. There was a mistake, Naina, you did. Tusarji is Collector and District Magistrate, not of Bharuch. And I regret the error, Tusharji. So we have with us Arman Ali, who is the Executive Director of NCPEDP and is extremely passionate about this subject, having been around in this domain for many years now. And one of the reasons we decided to have this webinar was because I got inspired by his passion for the subject. And I thought there is so much to do for each one of us. So when we posted the tweet, there was some comments as to why people like us talking. So Armanji told me the other day that disability is not only about disabled people. It is about each one of us in India. And therefore, I think, and he is of the view that the more we expand the ambit of the discourse, the more people start talking about it, the more action is initiated, even by way of discourses like these. I think more progress we shall make. We have made great milestones, but I think we have many more miles to go. Now, I request Arman Aliji to give us a holistic view or what has all has been achieved in last 75 years, and where does he see going ahead for next 25 years? Over to you, Armanji.
Thank you so much, Navneet. My fellow panelist, attendees, my heartiest congratulations and Shubhkamnaएं on the eve of 75th year of Indian independence. Navneet, I just want to add one more information about me, which I think you missed, is that I am also a person with disability. मैं खुद एक विकलांग हूँ और I use a wheelchair myself for my mobility. And honestly, there could not have been a better, time and opportunity to discuss about people with disabilities than on this eve of the 75th year, the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. No, I must start with the fact that we have really moved forward, last 25, 30 years, and, over the years, we have really moved forward. And you find disability being mentioned in almost every document that you see in the government or in the private sector. When it comes to persons with disability, you'll find a lot of mention. There's a lot of noise around disability. And I think there have been many milestones when it comes to disability, particularly when you talk of how census in 1981, census was included for the first time in Indian census. And then it was dropped for some reason. In 1983, the UN declared the International Decade of the Persons with Disability. I think that get a lot of impetus in the disability movement here. We had this disability rights group, which was formed by late Sri Javed Abidi, which became the force to bring together the entire disability movement together to demand for legislation, particularly on disability back in 1993-94, which resulted in the Persons with Disability Act 1995, and it's for the first time 7 categories of disabilities were recognized under this act. It talked about non-discrimination. It talked about reservations in education, employment, accessibility in public places. It talked about assistive devices, aids, appliances. It talks about social security, affirmative action. I think it was quite progressive, even if you compare it with the Americans with Disability Act in those time till, as you mentioned. And, using this legislation, the Persons with Disability Act 1995, people with disabilities started to, be, demanding their rights. And it was not limited to, a social security or a pension, or it was not limited to just admission in a school or a college or a job. People started to ask questions with the private sector. People started to ask questions with the aviation industry, to the railways, to built environment in public places, and started using the law in a manner which created a lot of ripples across the country. And people with disabilities, more of those who were semi-urban and urban, started using the law to demand for their rights. And there have been very progressive orders and even the government coming forward with policies which really provided a lot of relief to persons with disabilities. It followed with UPSC reserving grade A jobs for persons with disabilities. Even in IAS, and that category was not looked at as a category where the reservation was implemented earlier. And pursuant to this 1995 Act, people used the law, and that happened. India ratified the UNCRPD, United Nations Conventions of Persons with Disabilities, and India was one of the first countries to ratify this convention back in 2006, and it formed the basis of the present legislation, the Rights of Persons with Disability Act 2016. And Navneet, I must tell you that, we have one of the most progressive legislation that you can imagine in the world. Um, uh, and it so beautifully describes disability as a social issue. It doesn't define a disability as a medical model, but it keeps a definition in a very social model. The barriers which prohibits a person with disability to participate with other people on an equal basis, that situation is called disability. So from 7 category to 21 categories of disability, the reservation in employment moved from 3 to 4%. In education, it moved up to 5%. It talked about incentivizing, private sector employers and so on. Post this act, the Honorable Prime Minister launched the Accessible India campaign. It talked about 50 cities making all public buildings accessible. There's a judgment from the Supreme Court of India which says that 4% reservation in promotion as well. So there are so on and so forth. There have been a lot of discourse and very progressive approaches towards disability. But again, it brings us to the question, if you look at our census of 2011, it says that 2.68 crores of persons with persons with disabilities are there in the country. So about 2.21% of the population of India. So my question again is that then if we have 2.68 crore of people with disability, why don't we see them when we go to school, when you go to colleges, when you go to a public place, when you travel, when you go to a place of entertainment, or anywhere for that matter? I think why are we not able to see persons with disabilities there? And again, I'm saying that this is more than a decade now almost. I think that the census was due last year, but we are a year or two late because of because of the pandemic. But if you look at the WHO or the World Bank data, they say that 15% of the world's population has some form of disability or the other. And if you look at Indian population, if you look at in the sense 21 categories from 7 categories, there is a I think very safely we can say we are no less than 100 million people or 10 crore people with disability in the country. But again, the question remains that why don't we see them? Why don't we see them in everyday, in every walk of life, education, employment, place of, when you're traveling, even places of worship for that matter. There are certain data which is baffling also, and I must quote that the UDICE data, that Unified District Information System of Education, it says, the enrollment of persons with disability, students with disability at the primary level is about 27%. And by the time the student with disability reaches a secondary level or senior secondary level, it comes down to 0.5%. So the UNESCO report on education in 2019 says that 75% of students with disabilities drop out of school. Now, these students are largely, students who are deaf or students who are blind or they have a locomotor disability. I'm not even getting at, students or persons who have a disability which is cognitive in nature, people who have intellectual disability and so on. And in all this, girls with disability are the worst who are getting affected by this. So I think this is a very important occasion for all of us as citizens of this country to ensure that in the next 25 years, I think this laws, this policies all is super. I think one of the best that we can ask and have in any given country. How can we ensure that we leave not a single person with disability behind in the way forward? Also the data, if you look at Navneet, is that if you go to the poorest of the poor people in the country, you will find persons with disabilities in them. So it there's a vicious cycle where, poverty causes disability and disability causes furthermore poverty. So I think we need to break all these vices, and when the country is on an upward direction, and we are the people who I think the world is sitting and noticing at us, we must ensure that every person with disability, even the last person, the last village, is not left behind. I'll pause here.
Thank you, Armanji. That was a very lucid, well-crafted structure of the proposition of the issues at hand, the progress we have made. Yet, as I said in the beginning, there are many more miles to go. There are areas that require a concerted effort. Each one of us in the society, I think, can contribute. And that is why this webinar is very important, because it represents viewpoints from administrators like Tusharji, young IAS officer, a veteran journalist like Ashish Sinha, who has now gone into a role of a regulator, and of course, 2 IPS officers who have promised to join us. I welcome all those who have joined us, and thank you very much for joining. You shall have an opportunity to ask questions. You can please ask in the chat box. There is a Q&A segment, and we shall be happy to request our esteemed panelists to join us to answer these. Now, I request Ashish Sinha, who is now Secretary General of Broadcasting Content Complaints Council, to share his view, having been a journalist, having gone to one of the most premier institutions of South Asia, that is Jawaharlal Nehru University, where we had people with disabilities in our hostels. I also went to JNU. And then as a journalist, we had colleagues who were persons with disabilities. But is it just the tip of the iceberg? Like Armanji said, are we missing out? There are missing millions, a report that, if I remember correctly, that Armanji's organizations had brought out. Are we missing out something? And of course, I would want to hear from you, to learn from you, how the media portrayal, the mass media depiction of persons with disabilities, either is helping the cause or not helping, and what more needs to be done. Ashish Sinha.
Thank you, Navneet. Armanji, Tusharji, I'm very happy to be in your company, and thank you all the viewers who have joined us. I am not an expert on this subject, but my job has been to deal with the imageries, the perception, the portrayal of persons with disability. I would say the past 10 years I've been dealing with that. Pretty early when we started with this council, it's the self-regulatory body for all television channels in the country, not the news channels, but the non-news channels. And I think that is more important as far as depiction of the society is concerned. Pretty early, I would say we started in 2011, and by 2014, we had realized that this is a subject which needed to be addressed upfront. Because what we would see in those days, basically we were dealing with television programs. So caricatures, derising content, distasteful content, harmful content, humor. I think these were largely accepted in television programs. Making an example of someone who is a person with disability, it went on like there was chalta hai attitude. The council took it very seriously. We issued an advisory, and I am very happy to report that it takes a long, it's a long journey of persuasion, because you have to break the stereotypes. But I would say 8 years down the line, that the number of complaints that concerned persons with disabilities, they have literally disappeared from our television screens. So that is some learning on part of the TV program producers. Having been a journalist, I would say that there are certain stereotypes that are deeply embedded in our minds. I'm going to make a very provocative statement, but do hear me out. As part of our, let's say, daily puja, all of us sing Ganesh Vandana, Ganesh Arati. You know, when you go down the Arati, you will see one chopai there. Andan ko aankh dekh det, kodhan ko kaya, banjan ko putra det, nirdhan ko maya. Another example, when we are talking about Krishna Vandana, Mukam karoti vachalam, pangulam yate girim. All right, we are talking of times that are very, very, far behind from what we are living today. But the perception somehow gets formed there. Not just I've cited upfront. You see, even in other religions also, gods and messengers of God who would touch somebody with a disability and that person would get cured. Now, this is how it gets embedded in us, that someone who is a disabled is not just only different, but somehow the feeling is that he's kisi aur karma ka wo apna phal bhugat raha hai, stuff like that, So this mindset has to be fought. I'm not a technical expert, but I understand that in the past 75 years, in the past few years, I would say Armanji would be in a much better position to tell us more about it. I think that the government has already come up with a draft policy for the disabled in the country, and it's going to be formulated pretty soon. I could see that the last date is end of August for getting the comments from the public, and then there are draft rules also. Things are going to get better, but my main point is that this fight of perception, I think that's extremely important, Amit, and that's where we have to really, really combat it. Nobody is different, and I'm very happy that the present government came up with a new word, Divyangjan, to describe persons with disability. It's not only about according respect to them, but acceptance of it. That's it, Navneet. I'll come back.
Thank you very much, Ashish, and so heartening to know about BCC's initiative. And each one of us, I think, we have grew up as a journalist, first in JNU. But of course, there is a strata of society that inadvertently, also at times, if not intentionally, and that is kind of embedded, the stereotypes, they kind of grow up with age. And as Ashish rightly pointed out, this mindset has to be fought. And then I think there is a growing realization and acceptance by each one of us. Having said that, there are, of course, areas. So we may represent a very urban-centric views, having gone to institutions in New Delhi, having practiced journalism in bigger places. But we have with us Tusharji, who can bring us that subaltern view, having been there, having serving as a district collector and district magistrate. And what has been your experience, Tusharji, of this issue, and how have you been doing your bit? You are known for your innovations and being proactive. I'm sure there are great stories to learn from you. Tusharji, over to you.
Thank you, Navneet ji. Ground pay, whenever, on ground, at district level, at rural level, the kind of, like our 2016 legislation, it is in itself a revolution. Ground pay, what is required is to bring this revolution to the unreached, to those people who are still they struggling, and then they have to be enabled to get benefits of this legislation. See, when we are talking of 75 years of independence and 75 years of our work for disabilities, for disabled people, I would say, like, post 2016, a major change, like, whatever legislation a government brings, the intent and intentions behind the legislations do impact the execution of legislation. This is my firm belief as a bureaucrat on ground. So three major things were highlighted and discussed, debated. Like one of the aims of this legislation was to give equal opportunity to disabled people, to work for the protection of rights of disabled people, and have full participation. Now, these three things, matter a lot when you see work on ground level. I have one of the major eye opener event for me. One of the major opportunities that I got as a bureaucrat to work with Divyangjan and for the betterment of Divyangjan was in 2016 itself. Like 17th of September 2016, it is Honorable Prime Minister Sir's birthday. He celebrated his birthday with Divyangjan of our district, at our district where I was district development officer. And 11,000 plus Divyangjan were there, they participated. And that event, as a bureaucrat, I started seeing how, what are the issues on ground when we started, having camps for Divyangjans. So one of the major things that we are seeing is, like, we have to reach to Divyangjan. जो 75 years में हम बात कर रहे हैं, और जो next 25 years में जो आज आजादी का अमृत और महोत्सव हम जो देख रहे हैं और celebrate कर रहे हैं, the major thing is that we have to ponder over what we have done in last 75 years and what we have to do in next 25 years. I think next 25 years वाला vision में हम जाए और ground पे देखें, तो we should somehow plan कि कहीं ना कहीं हम उनको रीच आउट करें, कहीं ना कहीं जो हेजिटेशन है उसको दूर करें, तब जाके we can reach out to large number of people. I tell you, we have been, like, every day there will be some visitor or the other, at least a single person, maybe एक वीक में हम देखें तो 3-4 ऐसे लोग हमें मिलते हैं जो सीवियर डिसेबिलिटी से सफर करते हैं. जब हमारे पास आते हैं तो तब हमें पता चलता है कि काफी they have, like, there is so much of hesitation, there is so much of, एक ऐसा है कि जहाँ पे उनका खुद का एक लेवल पे उनको एक्सेसिबिलिटी के काफी उनको चिंता भी रहती है. तो मैं समझ रहा हूँ कि अगर ग्राउंड पे हम एक विजन के साथ चले, जो आज तक तो हुआ ही है, एक 25 इयर्स का एक विजन पे चले कि ये एक्ट जो हमने बनाया 2016 के एक्ट के साथ जो हमने आगे जाना है, तो वी नीड टू रीच एंड हाउ छोटे छोटे स्टेप्स आई शेयर विथ यू. व्हेन आई वाज डीएम बुटार, आई वाज डिस्ट्रिक्ट मजिस्ट्रेट इन बुटार डिस्ट्रिक्ट, तो हमने एक सर्वे किया कि भाई हमारी स्कूल्स के कितने बच्चे हैं जिनको यूडीआईडी देना बाकी है. हमारा यूनिक डिसेबिलिटीज आईडी है जो हमारा, जो गवर्नमेंट ने रिसेंटली इंट्रोड्यूस किया है. आई टेल यू, दिस इज पासपोर्ट फॉर दिव्यांगजन. एक पासपोर्ट है, एक ही कार्ड है जो काफी सुविधाओं के लिए द्वार उनके खोल देता है. अगर हम लार्ज नंबर ऑफ पीपल के साथ सामने पहुंच के, इफ वी कुड गिव दिस पासपोर्ट ऑन आवर ओन, हम सुओ मोटो उस पे काम करें. So that we worked in Bhutan, then we were successful, and we reached out to somewhere around 400 students of our school. Now they are with this passport and they can avail all the benefits that government gives them. कहीं ना कहीं my belief is कि जो गवर्नमेंट ने एक नया थीम पे जो एज पूरा मशीनरी, जैसे earlier we used to say physically handicapped, वो शब्द को निकाल के दिव्यांग शब्द यूज किया गया. एंड द वर्ड इटसेल्फ हैज स्टार्टेड अ चेंज ऑफ परसेप्शन. एज ऑफिसर्स वी आर सीइंग चेंज ऑफ परसेप्शन अमोंग पीपल, अमोंग कॉमन पीपल. एक दिव्यांगजन शब्द से काफी परसेप्शन चेंज आया है. अ मेजर चेंज हैज टू कम स्टिल, जिसमें हम इसके एक पहलू को इम्प्लीमेंट करते जाएंगे. कहीं ना कहीं 4% रिजर्वेशन मीन्स अ लॉट. उसके साथ साथ काफी लोग, आई शेयर अगेन द सेम एग्जांपल, जो 400 प्लस बच्चों के लिए हमने ड्राइव चलाया, देन वी रियलाइज दैट देयर वर सम केसेस वेयर पेरेंट्स वर हेजिटेंट, लाइक दे डिडंट वांट देयर चिल्ड्रन, they didn't want anybody to know that their children are disabled. ना वी वर कमिंग अक्रॉस सच केसेस। वहां पे हम जा रहे थे ग्राउंड पे, हम उनके पेरेंट्स को समझा रहे थे कि आपके बच्चे के लिए इतना इतना गवर्नमेंट के राइट्स खड़े हैं, you just come forward and we'll help you out, where your child for the lifelong उनके वो benefits को avail करेगा। I think this approach of reaching out to दिव्यांगजन, कहीं ना कहीं उनके साथ अब sympathy वाला नहीं बात करना है, empathy वाला बात करना है। So sympathy and empathy, two different things। जो गवर्नमेंट ने what like I entered bureaucracy in 2012, after training I joined in 14 से आज तक इंडिपेंडेंटली जितना मैं हेल्प कर रहा हूँ चार्जेस वगैरह, कहीं ना कहीं गवर्नमेंट के इस अप्रोच को मैं ज्यादा देख रहा हूँ कि कहीं ना कहीं द अप्रोच इज एम्पैथी। यू हैव टू कंसिडर योरसेल्फ कि अगर आप उस जगह पे होते तो आपको क्या होता। यू कैन विजिट आवर साइट। हम विजिटर मैनेजमेंट, वी हैव अ रोबस्ट विजिटर मैनेजमेंट सिस्टम इन भरूच डिस्ट्रिक्ट कलेक्ट्रेट। तो एक साइट है हमारा vmsbharuch.com। तो यू विल फाइंड दैट वी हैव अ व्हील चेयर इन आवर कलेक्ट्रेट, कि अगर किसी को चलने में प्रॉब्लम है तो ये व्हील चेयर नीचे आपके लिए रखा गया है। आप नीचे जैसे ही एंटर होते हैं व्हील चेयर है, यू कैन यूज इट। आप जा रहे हैं तब आप जो नीचे सिक्योरिटी खड़ी है उनको आप दे दीजिए विथ दिस नोटिफिकेशन। हम आप ऑन माय वेबसाइट आल्सो यू कैन फाइंड दिस फोटो। तो अब नाउ वी स्टार्टेड सीइंग पीपल कि भाई अब माय स्टाफ हैज बीन स्पेसिफिकली इंस्ट्रक्टेड कि अगर कोई ऐसे आते हैं दिव्यांगजन जिनको आपको लग रहा है कि फाइनेंशियली अ व्हील चेयर ऑल्सो दे कैन नॉट अफोर्ड, तो इमीडिएटली देयर फॉर्म्स हैव टू बी प्रोसेस्ड इमीडिएटली फॉर देयर बेनिफिट। हमें प्रोसेस करके रिक्वेस्ट भेजना है। एट द सेम टाइम दिस सेम चेयर हैज टू बी गिवन टू देम टिल द न्यू वन अराइव्स। तब तक ये चेयर इनको दे दे। कहीं ना कहीं ये एटीट्यूड के साथ हम काम करें तो वी कैन हैव better results। And as I told you, kahin as a bureaucrat, I am proud to have some legislations। there are certain legislations, for example, ये जो disabilities के लिए हमारा है 2016 का legislation। तो as a bureaucrat you feel proud to work। कहीं ना कहीं जैसे UDID स्टेट हमारी गवर्नमेंट जो देती है, सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट जो आईडी एक एक बनाने के लिए हम ड्राइव चलाते हैं, कहीं ना कहीं वी रीच टू स्लम्स एक्सेट्रा। एंड जो हम अभी नाउ वी हैव स्टार्टेड अ ड्राइव इन भरूच wherein we are planning to saturate our district in UDID as well। the entire district, all the divyangjan should be given UDID। उनके घर जाना है, सामने से अप्रोच करना है, एंड वी हैव टू वर्क। तो दिस इज फ्रॉम my part, and I think like 25 years का हमें विजन लेके जो चलना है, कहीं ना कहीं वी कैन स्टिल अगेन गो विथ मोर प्रोएक्टिव अप्रोचेस।
Right. So we have all seen that much headway has been made from what we hear from Arman ji and Ashish, Tushar ji. At every level, some progress has been made. There has been substantial progress by way of legislation from 7 to 21, one of the most progressive, as Arman ji rightly said, in the world, and how its implementation. Plus, there are micro efforts, plus there are efforts being made like that of BCCC on managing perceptions. And of course, your bureaucrats India, of course, is taking this initiative to drive and widespread this discourse. Coming back to Armanji. Armanji, what are the 4-5 key priorities you would want to spell out as we go ahead?
Navneet ji, if you allow me, I have a few observations and things which I am trying to, I would like to express, only if you permit.
Sure.
And I think it's very encouraging to hear from Tushar ji and Ashish ji. You mentioned about GNU and so on. It is an irony, that, I will tell you, any person with disability, anything that we talk about in this country, we can bring a disability perspective into it. So if you talk about COVID, if you talk about, any data, education, anything that you talk about, but and that is where, if you look at the Rights of Persons with Disability Act, it is a very holistic legislation. It takes into account a lifespan approach towards disability. So you mentioned about the missing million campaign which NCPEDP runs, and we say that millions of people with disabilities are missing. I say that in my opening remarks, how you don't see disabled people when you go out of your house, in school, colleges, work, place of work, and so on. And data is so so little and inaccurate data available around disability. So I think that's one of the important things. Tusharji is here, and I wanted to highlight this in particularly, that if something which you don't count, it's not counted, doesn't count. Something which you don't monitor, it cannot grow. So, we are living at times where, we have to stop doing these scams. We have to start talking about insurance. Why should people with disabilities get substandard aids and appliances? Why are we not becoming a hub? I think one of the points that I want to tell you is that we should become a hub for the entire world to provide solution for anything that you have to do with disability, whether it is education, whether it is healthcare, whether it is assistive technology, whether it is employment. I think India can lead the path and start the process for the next 25 years, that we become the hub, and we manufacture the best of aids and appliances that may be available across the world, best education system, inclusive education for persons with disabilities, and so on, healthcare, and so on and so forth. The mention of UDID cards, sir. The NSSO data of 2019 says that only 28% of disabled people in India have their disability ID card. So out of 100 people, only 28 people have. And Tusharji mentioned that, it is mandatory to have this card if you want to get any benefit or entitlement from anywhere which is sponsored by government and so on. So I think that's the reach. And there are so many challenges to UDID. They don't reach to people with disabilities. So I think the system of reaching out to disabled people, how it all can be single window, how it should be made more easy, and not a affair where it is a political in nature or bureaucratic in nature. It should come very automatically, for anything else. I would like to also JNU, you talked about, sir. JNU is such a brilliant and internationally acclaimed institution. Shaurya Sood, one of the students there, so right now he is running a signature campaign to make JNU disabled friendly for his wheelchair, because this uneven roads, he had a fall, the canteen is not accessible. So I think this is the times we are in 2022. The struggle has not changed, and I think I'm taking the liberty of your platform. I think you have hundreds and thousands of people who follow you and listen to your platform. And it's not a task of one administrator and one politician, and it's everybody, everybody who is in the position of making any decision at any point, including the person with disability. We need to change the status quo of looking at disability as a charity and a welfare approach. Disability is an identity. That is disability and identity, and that is not a qualification for me to get a job. One of the most interesting thing and very, very empowering thing that we have in the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act is the non-discrimination clause. It says that anybody intentionally insults or intimidates with intent to humiliate a person with disability in public view, assaults to use the force on any person with disability with intent to dishonor him or outrage the modesty of a woman with disability, having actual charge or control over a person with disability voluntarily. I think these are very strong words. This offenses have penal provision of 6 months to 5 years of jail. It is on the same lines of the SC/ST Prevention of Atrocity Act. I wanted to bring this in attention to Mr. Ashish Sinha. When the portrayal of media, the two extremes that we are looking at when you look at, either you are a superhero or you are somebody who don't have means to even survive your daily life. So I think what narratives that is need to change, sir, is to bring out the everyday story, the everyday struggle of any human being, when you do that, bring in the disability perspective. Let's not be let's not it be an affair which is linked to an election or linked to a census exercise or anything where you put a person with disability which is symbolic in nature. In India in itself, there's so much of stigma around disability, how disability is looked at as a result of a sin that you committed in your past life. So to challenge this, I think disability has to be on a mission in the sense of creating awareness amongst everybody. I again, Tusharji is here. Such a strong legislation. It says that in 5 years, all public places, all public buildings will be made accessible. All products and services will be made accessible for persons with disabilities. Now, it has not happened for whatever reason it may be. Now, will any development authority of any city will break down any building which is being constructed in last 5 years, which is not accessible for disabled people? No. Will we stop business for any international chain who's doing food and beverage services or restaurant or a cinema or a gym or whatever? If they're not disabled friendly, will we cancel their license? No. I think, these are the hard questions that we need to ask. The same, I can quote this, that Uber, which is an aggregator of cabs, internationally, if you look at how they're functioning and how they function in our country, they see a person with disability on a wheelchair, they don't stop and they just go away. I have friends who tell me that people, when they're blind, they have been taken for rides and they are the last person to be dropped, even if they're address. And I was myself asked to get off of Uber because they didn't want to put my wheelchair in the cab and so on. So there are many such narratives and there is a need. But again, another simple question, I take advantage of Tusharji's being here. Will we allow anybody to do business without a GST? No, there is no Ramayana and there's no Quran, nothing. You get yourself aligned and do business. Same thing, when we look at disability, we have a very, welfare approach towards it. Until and unless we make disability a part of your business that you do, we will not make it. We will not survive. And I mentioned that how it is important that we look at disability in a rights-based approach. You all, I'm sure, are aware that there's a pension. Tusharji would know that there's a pension which is every month the government of the state government gives to disabled people. It ranges from 500 rupees, 200 rupees to 1500 to 3000 rupees per month. And I don't have the exact data of the kind of what numbers are there. What is the amount of money that goes out? We need to turn that expense into a revenue. We should not, even if you give, 500 rupees to, 5-6 crore people in India, it's close to 40,000 crore. I think that an expenses which can come as a revenue and not as a cost. I think that's where I think we need to think. That's where we need to start looking at the disability. I must quote where this James Charleston talked about nothing about us without us. I think that has changed, where disabled people say that you don't talk about us without us. But I think it's the time there's nothing without us. You cannot discuss anything without disability imagining that a person with disability will be there or not. So, it gives you a lot of hope. One, that because you are in a country like India, which is growing, but, with the reality that we face every day, where disability is still at a survival mode, where we have to struggle every day to get from one place to another, to survive in the family itself because of the stigma that we have. So I think there's a need to create a lot of awareness around disability, which talks about the lifespan of a person with disability. People with disability are people as well. I think this is as basic as that. It doesn't require you to know rocket science. The needs are the same. It needs education. They need employment. They need the ability to go from one place to another with dignity. And if I think in some conversation with you, I said even make your police station and jails accessible so that there's a crime which is committed by a person with disability, they do not face any indignity or any harassment, or there's a way that one can bypass something. So I think we need to start work yesterday And if we has to be a country which leaves no one behind, and make disability as part of your everyday business, and not in a manner which is which is majority in politics. Like, the majority of people across the world are non-disabled people. 80% of the world have their four limbs working, they have the sensory working, so everything is designed around it. So I think times have changed. I think people with disability will, ask questions and raise their voice wherever they can. So I'll stop it now. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. You're watching Bureaucrats India's webinar. Today is August 14, 2022, and we have with us an esteemed panelist, including Arman Ali, who's the Executive Director of NCPEDP, Tushar Sumera, who is an IAS officer and DM of Bharuch in Gujarat, Ashish Sinha, a former journalist and now Secretary General of Broadcasting Content Complaints Council. Now he has been there for more than 8 years. And we are likely to be joined by two more young IPS officers to get us a policing view. Tusharji, you have any comments to make on Armanji's very pointed concerns and questions,
Responding to what he was discussing about the problems on the ground, like I would say, on most of the points, I would say कि कहीं ना कहीं we have moved forward. But there are points, for example, UDID, we can just move fast and that can happen, and that has happened. There are examples. So कहीं ना कहीं implement, and as I told you, कि 2016 के legislation को हम full implementation की दिशा में ले जा रहे हैं. On ground, we are seeing so much of change. From अगर मैं अपने 10 years के career में कहूँ तो मैं जो 10 years में changes देखे हैं, major change on how we see disabled people, how we treat disabled people. आज हमारे इलेक्शन भी होता है तो उसकी प्रिपरेशन पहली होती है कि एक्सेसिबल इलेक्शन कैसे करवाया जाए. आज हम कुछ अपनी ऑफिस भी बनाते हैं तो पहला बात होता है कि एक्सेसिबल ऑफिस कैसे बनाया जाए. आज हम स्कूल्स बनाते हैं तो पहला, दिस वाज नॉट हाउ वी यूज्ड टू डिस्कस एवरी टाइम ऑन एवरीथिंग दैट वी डू. तो कहीं ना कहीं आई थिंक वी आर at a position and at a stage where we have started taking note, not just started taking note, in fact started acting on it, and we are at a reasonable level. अब जैसे as I told you कि बस empathy वाले atmosphere पे हम enter हो चुके हैं and we are still there. तो कहीं ना कहीं बढ़ेगा काम और results will be there. We have to be optimistic.
Right. Thank you. Ashish, would you want to comment?
It's a great learning to be in the company of Armanji. Two takeaways from what he has said. One, that yes, I am very surprised, Armanji, that we don't even have a proper census done. We don't have a proper census. I was just reading through 2%, 2.5%. That's the percentage of population that is still part of the 2011 census. Some 26 million people. I think that's a very, very huge underestimation. And second part, again, learning from him, my perception is that this entire debate has undergone 3 stages. I would say, as I mentioned earlier, the first stage was of extreme negativity. Then emanating from Europe, maybe from the United States also, the second stage was of extreme normalization. I don't think that that is also a great thing to happen. What I mean is that to say that someone who is a person with disability is an extremely normal person, no. So the third stage on which Armanji is stressing, I think that is the stage in which we are today. And that stage is of says the rights-based approach, the identity approach, maybe the universal approach. When the rights, if it is violated, then there has to be a punitive action. I think we are in that stage, and that is very encouraging. That we have gone past the earlier 2 stages, and the present stage is very, very positive and we are moving in the right direction. I think Armanji would agree with me.
Right. Armanji, would you also like to talk about your organization and what you have been doing, and before we have some questions also coming in. And before I take some of these, one of our IPS friends also is likely to join very soon. So would you like to share about the kind of work that you do?
Sure. As NCPEDP is a non-profit organization, we are 26-year-old. We are based out of Delhi, and our strength is that we run this National Disability Network, under which we have organizations of persons with disabilities from all over the state. This network is 25 years old. And through this network, we keep the disability sector informed, and all the policies that is framed at the union level. NCPEDP is playing the role of a catalyst. So we focus on education, employment, accessibility, law, awareness, youth, and also communication. And so last 25 years, all that I have spoken about, we took the lead of, to include disability into census. We took the lead to bring elections accessible for persons with disability. And I must mention that we are a cross-disability organization. We're not limited to one particular kind of disability. We bring everybody on the table. And we give feedback to the government policy, and we work with them and also play the role of a watchdog wherever we feel that there's something which has been missed out. We encourage participatory consultations. So NCPEDP has been instrumental in the two legislation that we had in India in last 20 years. We have led that discourse. We talk about the national education policy. We have made the UPSC, the hiring of persons with disability in the private sector. So we do not run any services. Our work is around policy, research, and so back into 1999, we did this research to understand the percentage of people with disability in India who are employed in the private sector. We came to know that only less than 1% of persons with disability in India get any meaningful employment, and less than 2% get meaningful education. And that is what led us to start work around, because without accessibility, you cannot have education or employment, and without and we have the law which is on our side to make these provisions friendly for people with disability. There's a need to create awareness, so that's what we do. So that is what, in a very nutshell, NCPEDP does.
Armanji, Tusharji made a very, very valid point that elections today, and I was missing one of our very young, bright IAS officers again, who is now joined as a joint secretary, Kunal. Now, Tusharji, you would know Kunal. Kunal was the CEO in Goa before he joined here as joint secretary in the Ministry of Sports and Youth Affairs. And we had an opportunity to interview him once. And he explained about the kind of things that were done to enable access for Divyangjan in Goa elections last year. And it was fabulous. Now, it would be nice to also have some of these case studies collated. And from our side, of course, at Bureaucrats India, we are always happy to have such positive stories of change and which can inspire others. Many of the schools that we go, I recently went to NLU Jodhpur, where my son has got admitted, and I found all the hostels, all administrative blocks, all buildings were accessible. So certainly we have moved ahead, but I think Armanji has a point that there are many more bigger steps need to be taken. We have some questions coming in. Now, Mr. Jay Chidar, I'm sorry that we may not be able to entertain that question, because I think that is beyond the purview, but I will read it out. I'm a central government employee facing discrimination in my office. I need your help, I think you may contact Arman Ali ji, the organization. If at all there is anything that can be done from there, I think NCPEDP would be happy to. This is not that forum. We are advancing the discourse on disability and not able to help you as far as your discrimination. There are forums, there are platforms available where you can address. Any guidance to him, Tusharji, as to where he can go in case he is facing any such thing?
I think with more details we can comment. Like as of now, I can't
Okay.
guide. Like
Right.
it's
Okay.
just a general thing.
Sure.
With some details we can work out. Yeah.
Yes, unless there are details. This is a very unclear as of now. There is the Unknown Foundation. Good afternoon, all. Thanks for organizing this session and keeping it open to all. We are a couple of PhD students, including people with learning disabilities. During our PhD work, we visited several schools and noticed that many of the digital assistive tools are not available to the students because they cannot afford to buy them. So our PhD work focuses on developing a low-cost alternative learning tool for people with visual impairment. However, in this context, our question is there any way to make these products more cost efficient? I think Armanji can answer this question.
Yeah, I think so. I'm very happy to to help anyone who needs any advice. Also, the gentleman who first mentioned that he's facing some issues at his workplace. Be happy to help. I have shared my email address in the chat box. If this can be posted to the people who are commenting, I commented in the panelists thing. I think for the assistive devices that is talked about, there are quite a few options which is available, and one might explore, looking at what all is required, and improvement of certain products, which is an ongoing thing with, I don't know what he or she is using at the moment, and what kind of assistive device or product is used. So this specific advice cannot come, but there are options available. Some are expensive, but if there are need which is to do with a technology-based app or a software, there are many open source also available. But if it is an aids and appliances, we need to figure it out.
Kumar Mahavir, one of your fellows, Arman Bhai, he says, I'm NCPEDP fellow in Devghar, Jharkhand. In my research, I found out there is a lack of updated, disaggregated data of disability at panchayat and block level, which creates challenges, targeted policy intervention at grassroots level. Any comments on this?
Tusharji should answer. I think this challenge, I think you should be able to answer this.
एक बार फिर repeat करें कि what was it?
I am NCPEDP fellow in Devghar, Jharkhand. In my research, I found out there is a lack of updated, disaggregated data of disability at panchayat and block level, which creates challenges, targeted policy intervention at grassroots level.
देखिए डिसेबिलिटी का डेटा जो कलेक्ट करते हैं स्टेट वाइज इट डिफर्स. जैसे कुछ स्टेट में मैकेनिज्म ग्राम पंचायत वाइज होता है. In certain states it is like there is a separate department. For us there is a separate department which works on it. So it depends. I think like अगर डेटा नहीं है तो at local level it can be. देखिए ये स्टेट लेवल पे डिसीजन जाता है पूरा कि how the data is collected. I'm not aware of how data is collected there. In our places we have a department which works on it. Disconnected or what?
Anyway,
Is it disconnected? No.
Okay, no, I'm here. Sorry.
Yeah.
So the other panelists were calling, they're still stuck because of, there is a lot of preparations. The DCP in Delhi, he just called. He was expressing his regret. Ashish, any questions? Have you read about Lal Singh Chadda I hear that there is a and Armanji had written a very nice piece recently on. In fact, incidentally, his piece in Times of India Online has come today, which gives a very solid overview of the progress made and spells out a vision for next 25 years. But something about Lal Singh Chadda, how films can become a vehicle for, helping us cross that perception barriers, if any.
Absolutely, Navneet. Rather, I would not like to comment on Lal Singh Chadda because I've not seen the film, but I'm told that it's a remake of Forrest Gump. Oh, it was a great movie, but once again, this common thing that happens in any visual depiction, that somebody who has a problem and then he does wonders, then he is victorious. This feeling of absolute deja vu and winning and all, I think that is not very normal in our everyday lives. It happens. There are exceptions, but uh, it's all right. You are winning a battle. You're going great, but and films are meant to do that. There is a very, very strong messaging there, but our lives are not films. Forrest Gump was a great movie. I'm waiting to see Lal Singh Chadda, how it has come out. But I think a great deal of normalization is also required. My limited comment. I've not seen the film, so I will not like to say much about it.
Armanji, I'm sure you have a view on this as well.
No, I haven't seen the film myself also, but I, mentioned this to Sinhaji also earlier, that in how, media depicts the stereotypes of disability. Either you are a superhero or you are nobody, or either you are, so this has to go away. I think I have to watch the film to take a stand on it, but I hear, it's the history of how this film Forrest Gump was made, and how we have this Western story being made in Indian context is being also been criticized in a manner, because during the war with Vietnam, the US, the army wanted more people, and they started looking at people who came with low IQ and lower physical ability, and they were put in the front line to sweep mines and so on. So there it comes with its own criticism at that time, and so there is a need to do a lot of research before we put people with disability into a film. It has to be a story of everyday life, a story of what. I think there are many people who are achievers in our country. Everybody has a story to tell you, and it is not only limited to a person with disability, or so these circumstances are different for everybody. When you have a disability, you have a double whammy. You face a little more than what other people, because everything is not designed according to the need of a person with disability. Accessibility is not kept in mind, so the struggle becomes a little more difficult. This lack of awareness, stigma makes it even difficult for people to survive, and something which everybody takes for granted becomes a battle for a person with disability, and one has to use willpower and so on. So that's where the story changes, and people look at disabled people as having some kind of a superpower, but that is not true, and this should be done away with. One, I personally say. And we are talking about elections. There's a bit of a story about that. How elections were made accessible initially when late Shri Javed Abidi wrote to the Chief Justice of Supreme Court that elections not been accessible. Then there was Supreme Court order of 2003, which talked about making all the polling booths accessible for people with disability. So if you remember, before the elections earlier, they were to make a wooden plank ramp in every polling booth. And then when the 2016 law was being framed, the Rights of Persons with Disability Act 2016, it talks about making election process, not the booth only, election process friendly for people with disability. So now it is mandated by a law, and that's how, all polling booths are largely put into a school where there's an existing ramp. And interestingly, I will three things I will say here around this. Interestingly, that in 2019, when I went to cast my vote, my polling booth was on first floor. I had to be carried by 4 people for me to cast this vote. And then when I wrote to the election commission and I raised a complaint with the CEO, the chief election officer of Assam. And from after that, there was this order from election commission that all polling booth must be at the ground floor. It cannot be on different floors. So that's one. The other thing, fact I wanted to mention that there are 70 lakh plus more than 70 lakh registered voters with disabilities in India now. In the election commission, there are many, many more who have not registered. And third thing I wanted to say that, this disability is a political problem. So because, there is lack of political will and how it has been looked at a very welfareish approach. And with 70 lakh plus voters, they may decide the fate of many more political parties in times to come. So I think all this empowerment which is being happening through the administration, through the bureaucracy, through the people with disabilities and the society at large is empowering people with disability, Roger. And it's about them to know their right and their power that they have. And this will change their fate in times to come.
Right. And we were talking about the legislation and their implementation. So we are happy that at least this legislation, of which, of course, Arman ji also is a member of consultative committee member in the Election Commission of India, National Human Rights Commission, and many more. His biodata reads like a who's who and very, very impressive. Thank you. This is a discourse that shall continue, and I think many more people need to participate and join. Many more officers like Tusharji need to come forward, institutionalize a system, ensure effective implementation. Many more thinkers and regulators like Ashish need to act their bit as to how we can take this mission forward, as Arman Ali Bhai is very fond of saying. It's a challenge and a mission for each one of us. And disability is not only about the disabled, it is also about each one of us. I repeat to my audience, to all those viewers of Bureaucrats India, that Arman Ali, and he corrected me, he uses wheelchair and brings in that nuanced perspective about people with disabilities in India, about various rights and policies and programs that we need to undertake to make this a more broad-based discourse and effective action leading to substantive outcome. Thank you very much for watching Bureaucrats India webinar, and I wish each one of you a very, very happy Independence Day tomorrow as we celebrate Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav and 76th Independence Day celebration. Jai Hind. Dhanyavad.